All right, so welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be going over how to connect Node and React to MySQL and deploy it. This is going to be a 3-part course. In the first part, we are going to be setting up our server. The second part, we're going to be setting up our front end, which is going to be like really basic. And then on the third part, we're going to be deploying. So let's get into it. All right, so the first thing that we want to do is create our schema in our MySQL workbench. So let's do that. So for this tutorial, I'm just going to name it tutorial. Click apply, and then apply. And then cool, then it's created. And this is all that I need to do. So then now I'm going to create a folder for Visual Studio Code. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to name this, I'm going to name this tutorial. So I got this as tutorial. And what I'm going to do is open this folder up in the terminal. That goes to my other screen for some reason. And then I'm going to do code dot. So now that Visual Studio Code is opened up, the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder and a tutorial folder, and I'm going to name it server. And then in server, I'm going to add an index here. And this is where our server code is going to live. And then I'm going to close that out. Anyway, what I'm going to do is I am going to open up a new terminal here. And what I'm going to do is cd into my server folder, do npm init to initialize node. Package name server, yes. Version, yes. All this, yes. Okay, that is created. And then the first thing that we want to do, I like to edit my scripts, get my scripts together. Oh, hold on. First, let's install our packages. So we're going to need Express, of course. Cores.env for our environment variables. MySQL 2, because that's what the ORM that we're going to be using for this. Sequelize, CLI, and nodemon. So we don't constantly have to restart our server every time we make changes to our server code. So let that install. Okay, so now that our dependencies are there, let's edit our scripts. So the first script that I want to do is a dev script for nodemon. So when I'm developing, you can always listen to the index.js file. And then the one for our production, which is basically start. This is what's going to happen when we deploy it to Heroku. It's going to need this. So node index.js. Yep. Okay, cool. Save that. Now, since we have sequelize, I want to initialize sequelize. So it'd be a lot easier creating tables. It do it automatically for us. It's very popular too, so learning sequelize could help you if you're trying to get a job with SQL or being a full stack developer. All right, so npx sequelize init. So that's going to initialize sequelize for us, which is going to create a models folder, a migrations folder, a config folder, and a seeders folder. We can delete the seeders folder. We're not going to be using that in our tutorial and migration either. So what we're going to do is, so the first thing that we're going to do is configure our development database. And if you see in our config.json file, there has three objects that we can use for our testing. So we have one for development or three environments. We have one for development, production, and test. And we're going to be using development and production in this video. In the models folder, it created an index file for us, which basically creates, so for each file that we create here, so in this case, we're going to create a user.js file. It's going to create a table for that file. And of course, if you look into the code, that's what it's doing. So don't change this file. Just keep that file how it is. So before we do that though, let's configure this. So we're going to be working with the development one to start out with. I know my password for my workbench is this. I think for yours, it could be null, it could be password, it could be whatever you set it up as. And then for the database is called tutorial. And we're going to be using MySQL. Okay, so now that that is set up, we're going to set up our environment variables. The first thing that we want to do is create our, we want to make sure we are inside of our server file. And we want to do .env. Yep, and then for this, we're going to have it as port 3001. Just save that. Cool, make sure this is saved as well. Okay, now that this is set up, let's start building our index file for our server. All right, let's close all of this. We don't need all this. All right, cool. So the first thing that we want to do is bring in Express. And then the next thing that we want to do is initialize Express. And then next thing we want to do is use cores. So for cores, it helps us with communicating from the front end to the back end, so we don't get the origin error that pops up if you don't have this. The next thing that we want to do is get the .env file, because we're going to need that. And then after we do that, we want to have Express use use JSON when we are requesting, and we want our requests to come back as JSON objects. And then since we brought in cores, we want to use cores as well. So we want to do this cores. Like this. Now what we want to do is get our server and our database started. So let's do db.sequelize, and what we want to do .sync then, and then so it's going to sync it, and then okay, so it's syncing it, it's going to make all our tables from our models, and then after that, what we want to do is start our server. So app.listen, this is probably stuff you guys have done before. Process.env. So it's going to check our environment variables. And this one is going to be our port. And so if it's port or 3001. So it's listening to port or 3001. And then after that, what we want to do is console.log server is started. All right, cool. So now let's save that. Also, I like to do a catch. If there's like an error, I want to know. So let's do a .catch. And what we want to do is get the error. And then we want to console log. Console.log. And what I want to do is a backtick error connecting. So I can see the error and then pass this error message. Cool. All right. So now that that's good, let's do npm dev. Let's start our server. npm run dev. Uh-oh. DB is not defined. Oh, yeah. So our database is going to be const db, and it's going to be our models folder, right? So what we want to do is require, and then // I think, yep, models. Cool. So it's going to get every file in there, and if there was a file in there, it would create the table in our database. So now that that's saved, the error is gone. Server is started. Cool. Okay, so now that we have that set up, let's make our user table. So now let's do user.js, and then in here, okay, so with sequelize, which is very easy to use, first thing that we want to do is export everything, right? So we want to export, so exports, pass in a function, and then what we want to do is get sequelize, and then data types. So the data types that we're going to define for our user. So then what I'm going to do is const user. Actually, let's name it users. Let's name it users. Users. Yes. And do this const users. And this is going to be sequelize.define. And then what we want to define is the route, which is going to be, or the, actually, what are we defining? Users. So the sequelize defines the table, so the users table. And then what we want to do is get the columns that we need. So first, let's do first name, and then for this, it's going to be an object. It's going to be type of data types dot string, and then the allow null. For this case, is going to be false. You gotta put you gotta put in a first name. All right, then with that, we want to do, let's do last name. Same thing, type data types dot string. Make sure it's all capitalized. And allow null, false. Cool. And then let's just put an age. So we are working with another type. So then we're gonna do age. And then we're gonna do type. Data types dot integer. Do allow null, false. All right, so all of these are there. Now we want to return it. We want to return users, just like that. Save it. Cool. So now after we have saved it, you will see in your terminal that it created the table if not exists users. It added an ID, which is an integer, not null, and it auto increments for us, which is good. Our first name. We can just go to MySQL Workbench and look at it right now. So then we go to our users table, which is here, and then you can see all the columns: ID, first name, last name, age, created at, and updated at. So the ID and the created and updated were created automatically, which is good, and it does the primary key and auto increment for us, which is good. So that's created. So it's just that easy, to create tables in our database. So now that we have that, we want to add this. Oh, I don't think we even need to add this. Oh, I think the next thing that we need to do is create our routes. Right. Yep. So let's create our routes folder here. So we want to make sure we are in the server. So then we want to do is routes. And then in routes, we're going to handle all of our API routes. Right. So the first one is going to be users.js. Cool. All right, so we are creating our user routes now. So the first thing that we want to do is bring in express. And then we want to do require express just like this. Then we're going to do const router, and we're going to use express router for this. So express.router. I want to initialize that. And then we want to bring in our user model or users model or table. Require not this. What we want is .. get into the models. And since we already are destructuring, we're only going to grab user out of the model. So router dot. So okay, before I get started, I just get carried away. I'm ready to go. So the first thing that we're going to do is create our GET request, and then after that we're going to create a post request. So in our GET request here, it's going to be just how you guys probably have already done this before like this. So we want to do a router.get, right? And then since it's going to be users, this is going to be the /users route. Just by doing / it's going to be /users. Okay, so we can do / and then it's going to be an asynchronous function, of course. And then we want to do a request and a response, of course, because this is what we're going to be using. So with our GET requests, okay, so for this, the first thing that we want to do is, of course, get all of the users. So let's do const users, and we want to await users dot find all, right? Cool. So since now that is there, we want to return back res.json. Let's just turn back the users. Okay, so now that we have this set up, let's do a first test here. Okay, server is started. I'm going to use Insomnia. I know a lot of people use like Postman, stuff like that. I think I ran out of my request for the day or something like that for Postman, so I use Insomnia. So what we want to do is, I already have this. Let's do a GET request. We want to do a GET request for /users. Cannot get users. Oh, okay. Before we do that, we need to add our routes here in our server. So let's go over to our server, and then first thing that we want to do, let's do this routes, and then we want to do const users equals require look at, no, almost tab 9. You almost got me. But we want to do /routes/users. Right? Now that we have that, we're going to do app.use this route. We want to use this route, so oops. /users. So now we set in the route, and then that's going to use users there. Oops, so I forgot what we forgot to do. We forgot to export this. So all right, so let's export this. So module.exports equals router. Cool. So now it should work. All right, server is started. No more errors. Now let's do ascend. I don't think we have any users. Yep, no users. So it's connecting, but we have no users. So let's create some users really quick. So in order to do that, what we're gonna do is start with okay, so we're gonna start with a post request. So let's get that started. We're gonna do router.post, so we can create some users. Tab 9 coming into play. So let's do const values equals request.body. And then what we're going to do is const created user, which is going to be an await because we're going to be creating that user using sequelize. So we're going to do users.create, just like this. And then we're going to take in those values, just like that. And then once that's completed, we want to return res.json, the created user, just like that. Cool. So now that that is created, we can make a post request. So let's do a new request. This is going to be post. Oops. I'm just going to delete it. New request. Post. Let's just name it post for now. Whatever. JSON body, just like that. And then, so the values that we are going to use are the values that's going to be in our user model, because this is what's going to follow our table. So these are the only values that we need to worry about. Everything else, like the ID, the created at, the updated at, is going to be handled by sequelize. So let's do, unless you add those values in there yourself, then you can do that. But first name, and this is going to be first name is not an object, actually. It's just a string. And what we're going to say is John. And then after that, we're going to do last name. Pete. John Pete. And then we're going to do an age, which is going to be an integer. And it's going to be, say John Pete 35. All right, cool. Now let's get our URL, HTTPS, or we can just copy it from the Git. Same thing. Command C, go here. Command V, send, and there we go. We got our first user. As you can see, let's create another user, and let's also double check that that user actually went to our database. So we can go to our database here, and we can do select 100 rows. And we got our first user, John Pete 35, created at, updated at. Now let's see if it increments, or it increments. So let's do Joe. Let's do Joe Daniels. He 45. And then let's send it. There you go, Joe Daniels. He is there. Now let's do a GET request. Let's get all those users. Bam. So we got all our users. Now what we are going to do in the next video is connect React and get all of that set up. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.